How's it sound okay tonight? I'm counting on the one further in the back. What do you, is it, you have to come closer to here, or is it still okay? Okay. Everybody on this side okay? Okay. Continuing chapter 10, page 2122, we're getting into this section of another one of the obstacles to preventing not just understanding, but appreciating, maybe that's a better word, the Dharma, and then actually embodying it. That's where the great liberation and joy comes from. And in this case, Dharma leader Bodhisattva is answering Manjushri again on the question of the afflictions and why, when people know the Dharma and know what it can do, and maybe even have practiced it a little bit and get that flavor of it, why they still aren't able to be free of the klesha, panna, the afflictions. And just to continue what we were doing last week, we went into the afflictions and decided we'd do a little bit of breaking them down. So what we started with, and maybe tonight will be the last of the what are called the six fundamental. Anybody remember what we've covered so far? Not remembering is an affliction too, so not, sorry, but it can be. Which ones did we cover so far? The six fundamental. Google's got it. We did greed, we did anger, pratika, and we did ignorance, avidya, and we did pride. Oh, we haven't done pride. Really? Okay, so pride is actually in Sanskrit, it's mana. And it means, it's a little different than arrogance, which we'll go on, but it is related to it. It's conceit, and it's a form of conceit or over self-estimation rooted in self, a view of self and ego. And then a corresponding sense of self-importance. The opposite of this is a kind of corresponding a lack of not only self-importance, but even self-respect. And that can fall into the opposite of this, which is also an affliction that has to do with doubt. And there you dismiss yourself as significant as mattering. The major flaw of this is that it distorts perception. And then with that distorted perception, you're seeing through the self-important projecting lens. You can't see reality. You can't see the way things really are. The fifth is doubt. And this could be seen as the opposite of pride because there's three forms of doubt: doubting the teaching, doubting the teachers, and doubting oneself. So doubting oneself has to do with this sense that I don't have what it takes, I'm not capable, I'm a flawed individual. It could go, I'm not smart enough, or I'm not virtuous enough, or I just don't have the innate disposition to cultivate. And so it also turns into a kind of indecisive wavering as well. So you have two minds about what is true or what is genuine or what is to be done. You're kind of wavering between accepting and rejecting the Dharma, the life of cultivation. And then what it does, it kind of freezes you. It gets you into a position of not becoming involved in positive things. So you're always hesitating. You may step forward a little bit, but then the doubt comes in, the wavering comes in, and you put it off to another time, or you just hesitate to really commit. The one I wanted to spend a little more time on tonight, which is the sixth one, and it's a little tricky in the sense that it doesn't seem to be something that we normally associate with Buddha Dharma. When we consider the Buddha Dharma, we always frame it in the sense that it is orthopraxic. In other words, its rightness, its correctness is found in the doing of it, in the practice of it. And it's not orthodoxic in the sense that the rightness is found in belief or doctrine or dogma. Orthodoxy comes from that. So the sixth one is called views or wrong views or false views. It's dristi or diti in Pali. And it's not just a kind of a simple abstract collection of ideas or propositions you might have about this. What's your view about that? What's your view about this? Sort of lightweight opinions, even though you might hold them firmly. View here is much more deeply rooted. It's like a charged interpretation of experience. It's a charged interpretation, and it shapes and affects all your thoughts, your sensations, emotions, and then your actions. So it's a very deeply rooted freezing of position of an outlook. And the Buddha speaks the dangers of locking in on a view and forgetting its aim. So what the Buddha is doing here, he's saying having right view, which is one of the Eightfold Path, is cool, it's good. You have to have it. And you have to have it because it's part of the path to liberation. Wrong view, locking in on it, doesn't have this aim. You forget the aim is to end afflictions. And the view itself actually increases afflictions. So it's closely related to the fourth and fifth that we just talked about, which have to do with self-conceit, which is a charged way of being. You know, when you're in that position, you're not even aware you're in the conceited pride position. It's so strong. That's why we have tragedies, you know, Greek tragedies or Shakespearean tragedies. Hubris, this arrogant self-conceit flaw, is so deeply embedded in the character he himself or herself doesn't know they have it. They're unaware of it. But it's still a view. It's a very, very strong view, and it's a very charged interpretation that basically leads to their downfall. And you see in those plays, often there's a chorus or there's a couple of voices who say, wake up, be careful, watch out, you're falling, you're gonna fall. And the tragic hero, I don't know whether they're called a hero, the tragic character, can't see this, can't even hear this. So this is where views become incredibly part of the afflictions because they become an impediment to hearing and seeing. The other part that's very important here is too that these views can lead to arrogance, and then they can lead to disputes and division, and they start to become a kind of fundamentalism. Are you familiar with fundamentalism? No, not familiar with fundamentalism? What's your take? Hey, that's not bad. You put the rules and what was it? And the container, and more important than the compass. And the content, yeah. Basically, it's a tendency. It's a tendency, and it becomes more than a tendency. Can become a real locked-in thing where groups and individuals, it's characterized by application of strict and literal interpretation of scriptures, dogmas, ideologies. And what accompanies this is a very kind of in-group, out-group dichotomy that starts to form with a strong belief in the importance of distinguishing between your in-group, that you belong to, of course, that holds to all these ideologies and views and whatnot, and the out-group that doesn't. So this quickly becomes a very strong view, and then actually doesn't just affect you psychologically, it has a social impact as well. And this kind of thing can lead to sectarianism and schisms, and can actually then lead to violence and ethnic cleansing and religious persecution and so forth. So it messes you up personally, psychologically, to be a fundamentalist, because it really, it's like ice. You're frozen in, and you can't respond appropriately to situations. There's no nimbleness or flexibility. But when it groups, when people come together in a group like this, it can become actually very dangerous. And to some extent, this is going on in the world right now, this tendency, not just in what you would call other groups, because I'd like to say the other groups do this, but even in Buddhist groups. Any examples you can think of? It's not to blame, it's just to describe what's happening. That Buddhist thoughts, ideas, identities, ideologies, if you form them into that and see them as fixed and rigid and very absolute, can then lead to this kind of violence. So you see it currently, it's been happening in what I call Burma, now it's Myanmar, with the persecution and actually violent elimination of the Rohingya group. It's happening now in Ceylon and Sri Lanka, and also in Thailand. And there it's also between Buddhist towards Islam or Muslims. And this goes back historically. This isn't a new development. When Buddhism first came into Ceylon or Sri Lanka, very early on, it got the endorsement of the political order. And this is, so on one hand, that seems like a good thing because the royalty and the government embraces this. On the other hand, it also uses it to legitimize its authority and justify its conquest and imperial endeavors and so forth. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but it's really importantly to sort of recognize this and catch it, because it can seem very righteous. It seems so righteous you're not even aware after a while that you're really committing a precept violation of harm and killing, because it's justified by this sense of righteousness that comes from this very strongly held belief. The one a new book just came out. I just got it. I didn't get it today, Friday, okay? But I did get it, and it's a very interesting account of this. It's called The Robe and the Sword. You might want to check it out. But basically a modern description of what's going on with this sort of fundamentalist impulse in the Buddhist world. So I go back to the thing I was talking about. These are wrong views, not because the Buddha said they're wrong, or wrong because, let's see, dogmatically wrong, orthodoxically wrong. They're wrong orthopraxically. They're wrong because they don't work. They don't lead to the end of klesha, the end of suffering. And this is where the Buddha laid it down. It's very much, he has a very pragmatic approach. You could say they're wrong approaches, or they're wrong techniques, or they're wrong inceptions, ideas, maps, blueprints, whatever you want to call these ideas. And when you hold them, the Buddha said, they are off they're off center, and they don't lead to the liberation that comes from completing the path. They're against the path. And so the ways I think about it was I use tools. So some of you know that if you have a flathead screw, then you need a flathead screwdriver to turn it. If you use, what's the other one? Yeah, Phillips doesn't work it. But if you have a Phillips screw and use a flathead, it doesn't turn it. And then there's all these very special hex kind of, and they fit, they're right. And this is the idea of right view. It's appropriate, it's effective and efficacious for the goal. So the tool meets the function. It performs the function correctly. So the Buddha then listed 5, and I'm just going to go through them briefly, but he's saying these particular 5 views, if you hold to them, if this is charged into your identity, will lead you not to make it work. The tool won't work, it won't function. Its purpose will be thwarted. So he said the first one and the most important one is a view of a permanent self, atta, an unchanging permanent solar self. The second one is what he called extreme views. And these tie into either nihilism or eternalism. Either view is, again, going off the first one, there's an eternal part of ourselves that never changes, that lasts forever. And then the annihilationism or nihilism, with chitta, is the idea that there's nothing whatsoever, not only after death, which is part of the nihilistic view, but even in life. There's no cause, there's no purpose, there's no accountability, there's nothing. Everything is just chance and circumstance. And that leads to the third wrong view, which has to do with denial of causality, of cause and effect. And again, you can deny it. It's okay if the Buddha's saying you want to deny it, but it's not going to get you liberated. Because the whole thing of cultivation has to do with agency taking effect on your actions to change your karma, that changes the results that come from that karma. If there's no causality, then there's only fate, predestination, or void. The fourth of the, and these are called, by the way, these are called the, I'm trying to think what the pancha, they would be called pancha dristi, pancha meaning 5. So these are the 5 fundamental wrong views. The fourth one is this rigid clinging to speculative views, believing your views are inherently superior, and not either testing them out in reality or considering them in a group with discussion. And then the last one is very interesting. This one is called, Shilavatra Paramarsa. And what this means is that you feel liberation, enlightenment, awakening can come through ritual acts of devotion, of even just holding precepts, and maybe special ascetic practices. So basically you're saying the liberation comes through and these are sometimes called, why they're called Shila Paramasa, because it's the precepts. You're locking into the precepts as being that which alone determines liberation. Now the key here is that precepts do matter. They are absolutely necessary, but the text is saying they're not sufficient. So while they're necessary for liberation and creating a ground of centering, the actual seeing through and getting liberated has to come with the purification of the mind and through the removal of klesha, anashrava. Okay. So a little bit of, I know maybe it's not as fun to listen to all of this, but it's really important to sort of get that when it says afflictions or phanna or the klesha, we understand that these are actually pretty precise terms, and they're mapping out layers and aspects of human psychology and our behavior, especially in regards to self-cultivation and whether or not we gain some liberation or don't. It's not like, oh, crap happens, right? No, this is actually saying behind these setups, behind these arrangements, there's causality working, and there's this that leads to this that leads to this. And so these afflictions are called the knots. And in the Shurangama Sutra, the Buddha said, your goal is to untie the knots. But he said, unless you understand how they're tied, you really can't untie them. And so this is explaining how they get tied. So it's kind of like a diagnostic manual to take back from suffering, which is afflictions, and back and look how that comes apart. So it's somewhat analytical, but it's also quite therapeutic. Okay, moving on to page 21 and 22 of the text. We did the first response of Dharma leader last week. And this one is referring to, you'll see it in the fourth line of his verse, Do 1. And this is reference to another possible impediment. Before we had laxity, remember, and so forth, there was others listed. This one's going to a kind of, why is this learning could be an impediment to breaking free of the afflictions. And then let's do, I'll just do a few of these tonight and see how far we get. So if we could slowly read and pretend you are reading your good Chinese and not listen to me, I will go on and we will start here with a person floating on water. So the text goes, 如人水所漂 诸你二可思 于法必修行 多闻亦如是 Then it goes to the next one. 如人设美善 四二不实 于法不修行 多闻亦如是 And maybe one more. 如人善放药 I know he's reciting them. I only do. That's terrible. The audience is listening to me. Come on, you guys. 如人善放药 自己不能救 于法不修行 多闻亦如是 Okay, good. Otherwise, wow. The thing about the verses, and remember we were talking last week, the questions are in the prose form that precede, and the answers are in the verse form that follows. So this is the Bodhisattva asking Manjushri's, answering his questions. And the thing is, why in reciting this together, you kind of get it. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's got a little rhythm to it, the verses, but in English, it's all gone. We don't have the eloquence or the literary skill yet to render these into that rhythmic pattern that the verses, and of course, it's okay because it's most important to get the meaning right now, but on the other hand, as a mnemonic device, and the way the sutras were easily memorized and passed along in the memorization tradition before they had computers and disks and flash drives and even books, they were memorized. Now, I talked about this before last time, but this is an misunderstood or not fully appreciated actual Dharma practice, the act of memorization. And I won't go into that again. It isn't having to do just with the preservation of the text in an oral tradition, but it has to do with a certain centering and discipline, actually meditation practice of putting into memory these sounds. Not only are you doing this intellectually, but it goes in almost, I would say, biophysically. The sounds go in and they change the patterns of neurons and the flow of energy in your body and your mind by doing this. Also, you're putting in brightness, you're putting in light when you do this. And this can become a source of basically lighting up the mind to be able to see the nature. So there's many things about memorization that it's just a little harder to do in the English here. And so the verse goes, as a person floating on water, who, for fear of drowning, dies of thirst, so is one who does not practice the Dharma, but only amasses much learning. As one who prepares a lavish feast, yet is hungry himself and does not eat, so is one who does not practice the Dharma, but only amasses much learning. As one who is skilled at dispensing medicine, but is unable to cure his own illness, so is one who does not practice the Dharma, but only amasses much learning. So what you have here is a pattern, and of course, the closing line is again the problem. Do wan yi ru shi. Much learning is like this, like what? The previous metaphors, analogies given. So, for example, we look at this one on the death is not, what's the cause of death in the first one? If we go to this is the water, person floating on water, who for fear of drowning dies of thirst, so is one who does not practice the Dharma, but amasses much learning. I initially misread this. I thought they drowned, right? But they don't drown. Yeah, it's very interesting. They die by lack of thirst. So this is very interesting. You're in the water, and the fear is drowning, but the actual cause of death is not drinking the water, thirst. So it's almost like you're there in the actual supporting, nurturing thing to keep your life going, and yet your anxiety or fear keeps you from connecting with that, taking it in. And therefore you die sort of in the water of thirst, but not of drowning. Master Wyatt, a really interesting line. He says, you merely recite and study the Dharma that the Buddha spoke, hoping to understand it, but do not actually put it into practice. No matter how much you know, it is of no use. And then he says, this is analogous to being afraid, so afraid of drowning that you'd rather die of thirst than drink any water. The Dharma that the Buddha spoke is like water. You're floating in the Buddha's Dharma, learning and investigating it. However, you are afraid that it might influence you. Now he's going into the fear. It might influence you, for you're not willing to give up your afflictions and avidya, stupidity. That unwillingness is like the fear of drowning. And although you do not drown to death, you die of thirst because you dare not drink the water. Failing to cultivate the Dharma and merely being learned is also this way. You've not yet severed your afflictions, and your afflictions keep you from actually trying to sever them. So it's almost like a loop here. This is, fear is very strong here. It can sometimes just be like anxiety regarding cultivation. I've used the expression that sometimes there's the Bodhi resolve, and then there's the Bodhi retreat. And I don't mean like the meditation retreat, I mean the pulling away. So that, and people experience this right before a session begins. I'm gonna go to a Guanyin or Amitabha session, I really want to do it. And that's a resolve, and then a few days, and each day gets closer, it comes to the retreat energy. Well, I don't know, it's gonna be cold, the wood's not that good. That's really the superficials. Underneath all of that is, I'm gonna have to change. I'm gonna have to change my ways. And my bad habits and whatnot are gonna come under the spotlight. And so it's just like one of the students, I remember after retreat, she said, I know it's right, I know it's good, it makes sense, it's the right thing to do, but not right now. I wanna do good, but not right now. I'm afraid, she said, I'll have to change. So it's really a funny thing. And you know you have to change, and yet you pull back from that. So it's really a dilemma. It's really in the water but dying of thirst. It's not like the kids in the Lotus Sutra who are in the house playing with their toys. And the sutra says they don't know to be afraid because they don't know what fire is. They don't understand fire. They don't know that this is dangerous. But when you know fire is dangerous and then still say, yeah, a little more time, I know the house is burning, but I just bought an asbestos suit and, I got another toys coming from Amazon today, I'm gonna leave it at the door, yeah. Anyhow, it's an interesting line. The text goes on to the lavish feast. You're hungry, but you don't eat. And therefore, you don't enjoy the food. Same thing goes for, did we go with riches? Counts others' riches, but he himself does not own a cent. So does one practice the Dharma, but only masses much learning, right? These are the four we did tonight? Or did we not do the riches? In Chinese? Okay, well, the rhythm is the same and the meaning is the same. So we go with, as one who counts others' riches, but he himself owns not half a cent. So is one who does not practice Dharma, only amasses much learning. And then finally, another analogy, someone born in a king's palace in a royal household, but suffers from hunger and cold. So it is one who does not practice the Dharma, much learning is the same way. Again, just share some of Master Hua's commentary. And this is true for all of us when we were studying with him. He did highly regard learning and study. There's no question, and wanted us to learn as many languages as we could, not only the source language, whether it was Pali or Chinese, Sanskrit, so forth, but also to learn modern languages so we could translate these texts not only into English, but into almost all the languages available in the world. So this kind of study was something he really strongly encouraged. And you often say, I didn't have a chance to really go deeply in my studies. Don't follow me in that way. And I will support you in this. And many ways he did by setting up schools for this kind of learning, underwriting people's education, including my own. When I went off to finish my PhD, he funded the whole thing. So there's no question in my mind of the price of learning. But at the same time, he was very clear that learning, if not skillfully used, can actually become an impediment. It can lead to arrogance and then can lead to disembodied detachment. So in his commentary, he says, in regard to the Dharma, if you fail to truly and actually cultivate, but only investigate, applying effort at what he called literary prajna. There was certainly three types of prajna. One is literary, the other is contemplative, that comes from entering states of meditation. And the third one is natural, right on, when you see things directly without even literary or meditation. This is prajna paramita. Then although you gain, he says, much understanding of principle, you'd be like one who then eats, counts money, cold, and so on and so forth, like the excesses. Even though there's things available, you don't enjoy them. You don't get the benefit of them. And then if you go hungry, and then here he says it's your own fault. To be learned but failing to cultivate is like being at a lavish banquet and refusing to eat, and so forth. This is such a, here we are in the Bay Area, and we have, like in many places on the East Coast, say like Boston, access to some wonderful universities and colleges, and opportunities galore if you can afford these days to go, to learn. And most universities will offer a course or two, and sometimes maybe even a major focus on Buddhism or Buddhist studies. And this is to be supported. This is good, because it's very clear that these are like two wheels of a cart. One wheel is the study, the theory, the other is the practice, the actual embodiment, and you need both of them, because that theory without practice tends to be just fallow, sterile. But if you practice without the study and the theory, it's very easy to go wrong. And for example, the views we were talking about, you could fall into these views and not having studied them, think that you were on the right path, that you were righteous and your view was right and so on and so forth. And you mistake conceit for vigor or not turning it back. So people say, hey, you're a little arrogant and whatnot. Oh, they're trying to obstruct my cultivation. I'm going to go forward. So these passages, it doesn't mean that learned people are lazy. The failure is failing to apply the learning to actual cultivation for whatever reason. And I was thinking about this today. Remember we talked about the three kinds of lackness that apply to, what was it, Shiedai, right? Was the Chinese? Yeah, that applied to lackness. The first one was just ordinary laziness. The second one had to do with underestimating yourself. Saying, I can't do it, I'm not up to it. Now, to tell you about. But the third one was busyness. It was a kind of laxity. So you can be very busy in the world, really doing a lot of stuff, but spiritually you're lax. And we were actually saying in some cases, it's a substitute for spiritual. So instead of facing the great issues in one's own cultivation, we just get lost in the busyness. And therefore we don't have to think about it. It's kind of an escapism. But I was thinking today, from my own experience and friends I know, that third kind, that paradoxical kind, it's not just about busyness with worldly things, kind of fill up the vacuum, make us feel praiseworthy and virtuous. But it could also apply to learning, and even learning in the Dharma. So you're so busy studying, writing, researching, analyzing, to actually apply and live it, embody it, savor it, digest it. This masks, it's like, you can see somebody who's out there, making money and setting up corporations and IPOs and blah, blah, blah. And inside they know there's a hollowness. I faced this when I was working in the psychiatric unit of a general hospital. Usually people in their 40s to 50s, mid-50s, start to realize that this busy activity, this frenetic activity they've been doing is just hollow. And they go through a collapse at that point. It's more than just, quote, the midlife crisis. It's deeper than that. So that people understand, but you wouldn't think it would apply to the study of Buddha Dharma. But I'm suggesting that too, if you're not careful, could become a form of this third laxness. And I've had friends and colleagues who in fact are in that state. Super busy, super talented, super bright, translating and commenting and so on and so forth. And their own particular lived situation is a lot of suffering. It's klesha-centered. And the two simply don't connect. The one I want to share with you tonight, and this is, again, I really credit this person for writing this. I just read this last summer in Maine. Someone turned me on to this, and the title of the book is What I Don't Know About Death. What I Don't Know About Death. And it's written by a very eminent Buddhist scholar, C.W. Huntington, also called Sandy was his nickname. So in the winter of 2020, this renowned scholar of Buddhism, Asian religions, lifelong meditator, novelist, really health freak, received a terminal diagnosis of cancer, pancreatic cancer. And by summer, the cancer had run its course. It was in the last stage when he was able to find out he had it. And so in that time between facing his own impending death, led him to start to reconsider the teachings and practices of Buddhism that he had steeped himself in his whole lifetime. And what was really interesting, it's worth reading. I was going to quote sections from it, but there's no time tonight. But he has this sudden awakening that I have literally, sort of been in the water. And I haven't really quenched my thirst. But now as I face my own mortality, I'm starting to see these things are really relevant. These things are actually really talking about the deepest part of the human condition of how we come into being and how we pass out. And one of the colleagues, a scholar friend, wrote this, and I'll read you his review because it caused him to have this reflection. He said, one of the things the book brought home for me is how much talk on the subject of death is teacup talk. Teacup talk, without the slightest appreciation of just how this is so. In this book, Sandy deals with his own realization of how through all his previous study and work with death and meditation, sitting with hospice patients and scholarly work, it was basically distant and blunted. Because when he pondered death from the armchair, we're really pondering someone else's death. There is a denial buried deep within us, and the pondering is seen for what it is when death is, as he said, pressing in from all sides, and that was his expression. He didn't have the luxury of leisure now not to pay attention to this as his health deteriorated. So this friend wrote, one question that is interesting to me is to what extent the intellect of scholars and true intellectuals, such as he, are thwarted in the actual application of their learning and deep knowledge. I found myself wondering about this in this book, me as well, as I read it. It is sometimes the case that the learning and academic work, translating, writing, and the like, can become a burden or barrier or more of a complication when it comes to an individual's own path. Wow. So if you have time, it's a worthwhile read. It's very well written. It's really from the heart. You can see his scholarly abilities behind it, but you can trace it through as he goes through in a relatively fast period of time. But that he almost, I don't know him. It's a bodhisattva gesture to share that with somebody at the point that you're passing, and to bring all that knowledge that he had suddenly to an existential front and say, wow, and this is real. What they're talking about, this is real, and this is important, and this isn't important, and so forth. And now I wish I'd realized it not only sooner, but I wish I'd been able to say it sooner in my teaching. But now I'm saying it. And shortly after he finished the book, his wife helped him finish the last part of it. He passed away. So anyway, I share that with you. And then just to mention, because I was talking about Hanshan De Ching. And he is one of the, last week I was telling you about Pandita. Remember Pandita, the scholar monks? And Hanshan De Ching was one of them, at least in the Chinese tradition. And early on, he has experiences of birth and death. So he comes home and his uncle has died. I've told you this story already, right? Uncle's dying and he doesn't know what it is. And he says, Mom, what is that? She says, quiet, he's sleeping, leave him alone. And she thinks that's funny. And of course, she tries to wake him, and it's not happening. And his auntie says, you shouldn't do that to him. Tell him the truth, he's dead. And he says, what's dead? And they try to explain it to him. And then he says, well, wow, how does that happen? And then he was starting to say, well, how are you born then? And the mother said, well, you come out of my belly. And then he says, well, how did I get in there? and the mother is just like, okay. So I won't go into great detail here, but he experiences, and he wants to become a monk at an early age. This is very not atypical of many cultivators, monks and nuns both. If we read their biographies, they have these existential encounters, really powerful. And if they have an opportunity, in some societies they don't, but the opportunity to go into a deep spiritual life, monastic life, for example, they will do that. And now the problem was his mother wanted him to be a scholar, and he wanted to be a monk. So I read you the passage last week where remember they had that conversation back and forth? Yeah. So all his life, he went to become a monk, but he also did his studies. And he went to the elite school in China at the time where two paths diverged. You went into high government position, or you went become eminent monastics, but they were schooled in the same academy for most of their learning. And so he basically came across Jir-E, this great Tiantai master's statement that he said, study and practice are like two wings on a bird. And that really helped him. So what he tried to do for most of his life was to reconcile the two wings for himself. And so he basically saw that all of the Buddhists, Vinaya, Chan, textual study, Pure Land, the esoteric, he said they all flowed into a single stream of personal cultivation. And then he expressed it, he put it in, he says, as the Tao Te Ching said, because he was widely learned, he says, to Tao, all under heaven will come, as streams and torrents flow back into a great river or sea. So he took this very seriously and became, but he still wrestled with it. It wasn't easy. He talked about he had a demon of a literary demon. And he'd just constantly be writing poems when he wanted to cultivate. And then when he's cultivating, he's remembering the poems and so forth. And so he then came across something from Tsongmi, another great scholar monk. And his approach to the reconciliation was interesting. He says, Huayan Avatamsaka for philosophy and Chan for practice. That was his expression. And so basically Chan and Jiao together present the ideal form. I'll read you a comment on this. This is really fun. This is one of the better English books on the YN. It's from a scholar named Francis Cook. But he said this, YN for philosophy, Chan for practice. For example, you could say, YN, that's what we're doing here, okay? That philosophical. If one wishes to know, this is Avatamsaka, every Buddha that ever was, is, or will be, contemplate the nature of the Dharma realm, the realm of reality. Everything arises, comes from this mind alone. That's the philosophical statement. And then in Chan, you investigate this mind, and you go into it, so you bring the two together. Here's what Cook says. What the saying means is that the practice of existence presented by Avatamsaka is a universe experienced in Chan enlightenment. Without the practice and realization of Chan, YN philosophy remains mere intellectual fun. He says, never a vibrant reality. Avatamsaka, in turn, serves as an intriguing lure to the practitioner, a stimulus to effort, and a promise of a vision undreamed of in our more common hours. Practice ensures the Avatamsaka image of mutual interpenetration of phenomena is fully embodied, and becomes spontaneous and as natural as your breathing. It's a really beautiful kind of statement. Anyhow, we ran out of time tonight, but I want to share more. Next week I'll do more with Hanshan because he's really, I enjoyed his wrestling with this back and forth. But there came a time he was really wondering, it was just before his exams at this university, right? And he was ready. He had memorized, wow. Basically, they say he could memorize most of the four classics, the Sishu. And yet he had these doubts. And so the night before he was to take the exam, he read this Chan text. And after reading it, and I'll quote him, he said, I decided to join the Sangha and ask the abbot to shave my head. This book changed my life. And after reading it, Hanshan concluded that the further study of secular works would hinder him on a spiritual path. So he was torn. He says, I'm going to I'll do well in this exam, but for what reason? And then this last line, so in his autobiography, he writes that after shaving his head, what did he do? He says, I burned all my books. Shaved my head in order to concentrate on Chan training. And I add here, and yet to be continued. So that's not the end, but it was one juncture as he was wrestling with Dowan, the main passage of the text tonight. And I don't think it's over. And anyway, I'll just tell you a brief story. When Heng Sure and I were doing the bowing pilgrimage, we had both been masters, and I had been ABD, all but dead in any of that. And somewhere halfway in the pilgrimage, we came on, we both had the same thing. Master, we were thinking we should finish our PhDs. He wrinkled up his face and looked at it. PhDs? You guys are cultivators. Why would you go backwards to a PhD when you're, I mean, almost like here you are on the mountain of jewels and you're looking for coal. You're grabbing little coal nuggets. Oh yeah, okay, sorry. So done. And we finished the pilgrimage, and sometime after, a year or two after, 3 years after, 4 years, I can't remember which, he was lecturing and the master said, you know, come up and talking, well, how's it going, what's up? He would do this in his lectures. And he said, Goteng, what do you think about going back and getting your PhD? I said, sure, fool. Let me remind you, the last time I brought this up, you said I was really dumb and stupid that I wanted to do this. So now, he says, yeah, now it's okay because you don't want to. And there was really something to that statement. It was the wanting of it was a little bit of conceit and, you know, whatever fame seeking, and the not wanting of it made that I could turn the PhD and not have the PhD turn me. So any event, I personally can identify with some of these verses. Okay, that's it for tonight. Thank you for being patient. I hope it cleansed some of Black Friday's whatever. You saw online that there were Black Friday Avatamsaka bargains tonight, right? That's why you're all here. What's that? Yeah. 50% off BTTS, 25% off a Bodhi. Trade in your afflictions, whatever shape they're in, and you'll get a new affliction. No. Announcements, I think nobody's here to announce. Locke, do you have any announcements for, I know there's an Amitabha session coming up at the city. It's the winter. Anybody know when? And yes. Little louder, Connie. 20th of December to what? 26th, 27th? So 7 days, a standard chi, 7-day retreat in the cold of winter, reciting Amitabha's name. I think it'll be in the Buddha Hall, and I think Doug will be giving talks at night. So it's a wonderful opportunity to study and practice, bring them together. Bring warm clothes. The city is not very well heated. Any other announcements? We'll continue this class until the 12th, December 12th. That'll be the last. We'll take the break for the interim and then come back end of January, early February, and continue with chapter 10. Any other announcements? Okay, so we'll do the transference in English. No, she said there's not 50% off of BTTS. There is. Oh, okay, so there's 50% off of BTTS. We have our own Black Friday. Wow, okay. Who says we're not hip? Okay, let's go. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the triple jewel.